Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is our first office hours style webinar. And one of our goals for today with this new format is to really make sure that you all, as our users, have a really good understanding of our platform so you can get the most out of your data collection. So we're really aiming for that goal today. I want to briefly introduce all of us who are going to be speaking and or moderating today. So we have Mofia Theory, our customer research advisor, Syed Gilani, customer support associate, and myself, Shirley Sweeney. I am the director of digital marketing at Dubility. And so a brief overview, if I may. SurveyCTO is a great platform for data collection. It gives you the ability to collect data with data quality and data security in mind, right? And so today we're going to go over two key components of the platform, specifically constraints and relevance. And so that familiarity with these key concepts will give you the know-how and the foundation to start collecting high quality data in the first place. So we will first go over a high level explanation of what specifically those two elements are, and then leave the majority of this office hours to kind of go over any questions that you all may have. Because as you know, a pro of of an office hours style format is the ability for you to ask questions. And a little bit of housekeeping first. Because we record our webinars, we want to ensure data security and data compliance, right? So we won't be doing any attendee screen sharing. And along those same lines, please don't share any links in the chat to your form definitions. But please do submit your questions in the chat section, which you all are inputting in there. And we will answer your questions either live if we know that they're a little bit quicker, or we'll answer them in the order they were received. So when we get to your question, we'll unmute your mic, or you can unmute yourself so that you'll be able to ask your question if you want to explain it a little bit more. And lastly, if we find your question a little bit too complicated to answer live, we'll request that you submit a support center ticket instead. You all, as trial users, will have access to our great support center. I will stop sharing and let Syed start us off with constraints.
Thank you, Shirley. Hi, everyone. My name is Syed. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you guys are joining us from. So in SurveyCTO forms, the first thing you specify about a field is the type of field. So for example, an integer, text field, select one, and so on. This is the most basic way of limiting what can be entered into a field. So for example, an integer field will only allow you to enter integers, and so on and so forth. So beyond these data types, you can include more specific limits on what can be entered into a field. And this is what we call constraints. So a constraint is a condition that is applied to a field that must be satisfied before the value entered into that field is accepted. So if a user's entry or selection doesn't meet the constraint, the user will have to correct it before continuing to the next field. The most common way to use a constraint is if you know the range of possible answers. Let's say for an integer field. So for example, let's say you're collecting the legal age of an adult in your form, and you expect the answer to be somewhere between, let's say, 18 and 100. You will set up a constraint for that field that will only allow to accept answers in that range. And if you input something outside of that range, let's say 15, for this example, it will display a constraint message like please enter a valid age or something along those lines, and then allow the user to correct their response. So this is the basic way in which constraints work. The use of constraints can help prevent common errors such as typos or illogical responses and is helpful to stop respondents from spamming or speed running through a form and enforce specific valid formatting. This can save time and resources in data cleaning post data collection. An example of that would be when a survey involves pre-assigned unique IDs. A common practice is to require the enumerators enter the ID twice to help avoid input errors. So you enter the ID in the first field, and then for the second field, you can add a constraint that requires the entered ID to be equal to the value of the first field. So this way, if those two IDs do not match, it will display a constraint message, and the enumerator can then fix this error at the time of the entering data and eliminate the need for corrections post data collection. So this type of using constraints in this way allows you to stop from post collection data cleaning, which is time consuming and prone to oversight. Constraints can stop these issues at the source, ensuring that all submissions meet your defined standards and lead to higher quality data. So in SurveyCTO, you can apply various types of constraints. A few examples are range constraints. These are used to specify the acceptable range of values. So an example would be what we discussed earlier, collecting the legal age of a respondent. And then there's comparison constraints. These allow you to compare the response to a particular question with other values or responses. So an example of that would be re-entering unique IDs. And then logical constraints using logical operators such as and, or, and not to combine multiple conditions. And then format constraints. This way you can set up a constraint that will only approve texts that have a certain formatting. So for example, if you're collecting email addresses, you can specify a format that includes, so the email has to include the @ sign or have a .com in the end. So you can set up a constraint that way that will only allow texts that follow that certain format or pattern. And then when a constraint rule is violated, the user is notified with the default message. Even though in some cases this can be sufficient, it is better to explain why the entered data wasn't accepted. So you can customize your constraint messages and when adding a constraint to a field. Then these customized constraint messages then help guide respondents to provide data that fits the requirements, improving data accuracy and leading to increased completion rates. Constraints, like other expressions in SurveyCTO, evaluate between screens. So with a single field on a screen, when you attempt to move to the next screen, the constraint will be evaluated, and if the constraint expression is true, you will be able to pass. And if it's false, you will be blocked from moving to the next screen. So it's like when you're collecting data, it's like every field the constraint will go through before you can move to the next field. So an important point when using these constraints in a field list group, a field list group is basically a group which has multiple fields on the same screen. So when you apply different constraints to all those fields, only one field's constraint will be displayed at a time, starting with the topmost field. So it's important to ensure that the constraint message clearly indicates which field's answer was problematic. And then these are similar when we talk about relevance later on. So a couple examples of constraints here you can see is age with an exception that we discussed before. You can add a constraint that will limit the response between certain values, and then you can have an exception like -99 in this case, representing don't know or if the respondent refuses to answer. And then the second example, we discuss dynamic date constraints that dynamically constrains a date field's answer relative to today's date. So I will cover these two examples in a live demo. So we have these two examples, right? So we have a field setup. This is in the SurveyCTO server console. So we have a field setup for age that asks the respondent to enter their legal age. So we go on the left-hand side, you can see these options: required, labels, relevance, constraint. You go to the constraint option. Currently, we don't have any constraints. We save this and try to test this. So we're using the online form inspector here to test our forms. So you can enter any age right now because this field does not have any constraints. So let's say 15, and it'll allow you to go to the next field. And you can even enter a negative number, like -22. So now if we go back and edit this field again, So on the left-hand side, we'll select constraint and then add constraint. And there's two ways you can add these. You can add them with the wizard or specify by hand. So for this example, let's use the wizard. And this is a numeric constraint. So for a legal age, we can say the minimum value should be 18, and then the maximum value should be, let's say, realistically 100. And then let's select negative 99 as the code that the user can enter in case they refuse to answer if they don't know. And then we can have any constraint message here. So we could be like, please enter the age between 18 and 100. And we save this and then save the field. Now, if we go back and test these, we reload the form. You can see if you enter 15, it will display the constraint message. If you enter 101, it won't allow you to move on, but if you enter something between those the constraints, you can move to the next field. Or you can enter negative 99. That's our exception in this case, and you can move to the next field. And for the next example here, we're collecting the date of birth of the respondent. So this field currently has no constraint. So you can select any date, even in the future, which cannot logically be a date of birth, but it will allow you to move forward in this case. But if you go back and add a constraint to this field, so you go to the left-hand side, select constraint. In this case, we can try the specify by hand option, and we'll use the today function. So dot less than, so a dot or a period, it resembles the current field when you're making a constraint expression. So you use that to find the current field. And then you say less than equal to today function. You can use any of the functions listed in the SurveyCTO expressions chart to end your constraint. And then the constraint expression, the message could be, please enter a valid date of birth. So you save this. And now if we go and test, reload, and go through the form. Now this won't allow you to select any future dates, but see the constraint message is displayed saying, please enter a valid date of birth. But if you go back and select any date in the past, say March 2019, you can move forward with the form. So these are two very basic examples, but the idea is to practically show you how to add these constraints. But there are endless possibilities, and we have a lot more. Yeah, so we have a lot more examples that we can cover if we have time later in the webinar. So yeah, here I would like to quickly shout out the SurveyCTO AI assistant. It's available on every page of our website. You can enter prompts in the AI assistant, and it can help build these constraints and see how these constraints are applied. I found it super helpful to build these constraint expressions with the AI assistant myself. So I think this is all on constraints for now. I would like to invite my colleague Mafia to take over and speak about relevance.
Thank you, Syed. So the next concept we'll be speaking about is what's referred to as relevance. Okay, and basically, relevance in SurveyCTO is a tool that displays only the questions that apply to each respondent. Okay, it will look at the previous answers, and it will be going forward, looking at what's coming ahead, and trying to make sure that it only shows the questions that are relevant to that particular user. This feature, if you used it in other programs, you might hear terms like skip logic, or you might hear terms like branching. You might hear terms like display conditions. Okay, it essentially does the same thing. What it does is it streamlines your surveys by guiding your respondents to answer only what's relevant to them. You can think of relevance as defining the specific conditions under which a field or a group of fields should be shown. For example, you might ask income-related questions only if a respondent is currently employed. Or you might display pregnancy-related questions only if the respondent is female. By default, all the fields in your form are going to be relevant, but using relevance conditions is going to allow you to create a smooth and more engaging experience. So instead of cluttering the survey with unnecessary questions, relevance allows you to focus on collecting the most meaningful data for each and every respondent. Why is relevance important? Okay. When you apply relevance in your forms, it's going to give you quite a number of benefits. One of the first benefits is it's going to give you improved data quality. Because they're limiting the questions to only those that are relevant to each respondent, you're going to reduce irrelevant answers. For example, if I'm going to ask about pregnancy, okay, and only females can get pregnant, so you're basically then going to say, if somebody is not female, I will not ask them about pregnancy. So you have that sort of logic behind in your form, okay? So that's going to make sure that you have an accurate data set. It also reduces the number of missing data as it removes the chance for manual skipping errors that can occur if you are doing this by, just sort of either paper or you're just thinking about, is this question relevant or not? Okay, so overall, you have fewer irrelevant questions, and so your respondents are less likely to give you random or inaccurate responses. The user experience also benefits significantly. With relevance, surveys become shorter and more targeted, displaying only what's needed for that particular respondent. So it will keep the survey concise, but maintaining the respondent's engagement and focus. And by creating a more streamlined and interactive experience, it can lead to higher completion rates, okay? Because respondents are less likely to drop off due to survey fatigue. So a well-structured, relevant survey is not only more efficient, but it's also more enjoyable for the respondent, and it will encourage them to be able to complete that all the way to the end. So relevance in SurveyCTO can be applied either to individual fields or to groups of fields. When you apply relevance to a group, it particularly helps with efficiency, okay? Because then if multiple questions have the same condition, you can then skip them at the same time. Okay, so for example, if you want to obtain consent, you've got a set of questions and you only can proceed to answer those questions if somebody has consented to answering them. You can put those questions in the group and then add your relevance to that group. So if you get consent, then all those questions show up. If you don't get consent, those questions will not appear. Okay. When you're working with fields that are on the same screen, okay, we referred to these earlier as field lists. Okay. You have the questions are all on the same screen. Then you need to be very careful about how you apply relevance. Relevance in that case can only be calculated once you've moved past those fields. If one of the fields' relevance on that screen depends on another that's on the same screen, you could easily miss out on that relationship and the logic that is there behind that. So generally, if you're going to apply relevance, you want to make sure your questions are on separate screens so that you don't end up with logical errors in the way you structure your form. Okay, so that's just a key thing to keep in mind. Okay, so how exactly do we apply relevance? We have two examples here. Okay, so we'll start first by looking at how to show an employment-related question only when the respondent indicates that they're currently employed. Okay, and then we will try and look at how we can apply relevance to a group. So we're going to ask for consent, and then we have two small questions that will come after that, and will only show up if we have actually gotten consent for that. So let's try and see what this looks like in SurveyCTO. So I'll jump into my server console. Okay, so here, as you can see, I have a form, and in my form, I have a question here which says the name of the question or the ID for the question is employed. And it just asks, are you currently employed? And then there's another question which says, what is your current job title? Logically, we are saying for you to ask for a job title, this person must be employed. If somebody is not employed, then they will not have a job title. And if we were to test this out and look at what the form looks like right now, if we go into the form, we've got this question that says, are you currently employed? If we say yes, we get that question. What is your current job title? Great, that's what we would want. But we're also saying when we say no, are you currently employed? No. And we go to next. We don't want to ask this particular question. And that's the idea of relevance. We should be able to skip this question if somebody is not in formal employment. All right, so how do we do that? So I'll come back in here, okay, now form designer, and then I will go on to the question job title, okay, the one that says, what is your current job title? I'll click on edit here, and you can either use the shortcuts on the left-hand side, or you can just scroll down here and you'll find the relevance section. And again, you can add relevance in two ways. You can use a wizard, or you can specify your relevance by hand. At least for these examples, we'll use the wizard so that it guides us through how we actually can do this. So I'll click on add wizard, okay? And I have a couple of options here, okay? The first part here, it says the field is relevant if any of the following conditions are true. You can get a hint from there that it's possible to have multiple conditions. But in this case, we just have one condition. And our condition is that we're going to look at a particular field, okay? The field that we code is employed. So I'll click on the field is employed, and then I'll say, I want this question to be relevant. I want this question to show up if the response to is employed is a certain value. In this case, you can see it gives me the options that are there for is employed. It can be either yes or a no. Okay, so in this case, I want to say yes. And when I click save there, and then I can save this field. And just like that, we've set up our relevance. And we can test it quickly to see if this works. So I'll click on that toggle button there, and I will say, let's update the form so that these changes that we have made can be applied. So a form will load, and then we can do the same test that we had previously just to see that it's working correctly. Okay, so if we click on next here, so now when we say, are you currently employed? We say yes. We should be able to see our question that asks for a job title. And ideally, if we said no to this question, then we get past that question. So we skip that question and it won't show up. So you can see already how you can use relevance to manage that. Okay. The second thing I just want to show is that you can apply this relevance to multiple questions by applying it to a group. And this is really a benefit of efficiency and organization. So in the same form, we've seen these two questions, but I have a second group here called Health Info Group. It basically has health information. And inside this group, I have two questions. One question says, do you have any existing health conditions? And another, have you been vaccinated? Now, what I'm saying is I want to only be able to ask these questions if somebody gives me consent to answer health-related questions. So those two questions are in one group, okay? And I want to be able to see them only if I get consent. And we can again quickly look at what this currently looks like. If I go back to test, this is our question. Do you consent to answer health-related questions? So if we can say yes, we are going to go into that group. And so you can see we're inside the health information group, and we're able to see both of those questions. But if we go back, okay, and say no, right now we still see both of those questions. We don't want that to happen. So let's go back in there. And now we're actually going to apply the relevance not to each individual question. You could do that, but the easiest way is to just apply it to one group. Okay, so I'll click on edit for the group here, and you'll see that there is a section for relevance within the group. Again, it's a fairly easy process. Add your relevance, add with a wizard, and then come down here and look for your field. Okay, so which field are we looking at? As health as is consent. Okay, so you click on consent, and then what value should consent have, either yes or no. In this case, when somebody has consented, then we want the group questions to show. Okay, and you click save on that, save now, and you're ready to test. So you can come in here and test this. The easiest way to test is essentially just to update the form. Could save those details, but I won't for now. And we should be able to see that. Okay, so we have this go to that allows us to skip the first two questions. So we'll jump straight to our question on, do you consent to answer health related questions? Okay, so if I say yes, I expect to see those two questions. Okay, so starting with this first one and then also the second question here. So there are two questions that will be shown. And if I say no to this, I basically am going to skip over those two questions and go to the end of my form. Okay, so it allows you to be able to manage the flow through your form. All right. That's what relevance does for us, and that's how we can do it. Now, what we have done here is that we have shown very basic examples. But SurveyCTO's relevance feature can handle much, much more complex scenarios. Okay. So you can have multiple conditions. As you were able to see, there's a button that said add another condition, add another condition. So for instance, you may want to ask a follow-up question only if the respondent is employed and meets another criteria. So maybe you say, they must be employed and married, or they must be employed and of a certain age, maybe 30 years and over. So you can use the and or logic to allow you to combine such complex criteria. You can also do date-based relevance. For example, you might want to ask about the respondent's current living location, but only if they've lived in a certain place for over a year. Okay. And so you can use date conditions to be able to manage that. So these are just some examples that show how SurveyCTO's relevance feature can adapt your form so that you have more nuanced data collection. All right. We have spoken a lot. Would like to hear from you. So we'll move it over to our Q&A. I think I'll stop sharing and hand over to Shirley.
All right. Thank you so much, Mofia and Syed. And so hopefully you all have a good understanding of the foundational elements of both constraints and relevance, right? And you heard from Mofia and Syed that there are also much more complex things you can do with those two tools. And so we have a couple of options. I think we can go through and show you again, or not again, we can go through and show you the more complex things you can do with constraints and relevance. We also know that there are common questions that we get from our users that we can also go through, but I want to make sure that we're able to answer any questions that you all have. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat.
I have a problem where about the number of plots. And after mentioning the number of plots, then comes a series of other questions for each of the plots. For example, if a respondent says, I have 2 plots, then the question comes, what is the name of the first plot? What is the name of the second plot? Then a series of questions comes for each of the plots, like who owns the first plot that you cultivated? What is the size of the first plot? Which crop did you grow in the first plot? Then after finishing those questions, you come again and ask the number of, those same questions for the second plot and the third plot. And the respondent, I have a problem how to frame such questions so that the SurveyCTO fix the number of plots that has been mentioned by the respondent and also the questions that follow? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good question. And in SurveyCTO, the way you would do that is actually using a principle we call repeat groups. So repeat groups allow you to have a set of questions that can be repeated a certain number of times. Okay. So for a repeat group, you will state how many times you want those questions to be asked. So in the example that you gave, you will say how many plots do you have? Okay, so that might be an integer question, and then you will put all the questions that apply to each individual plot in one repeat group. So it will be a group very similar to what I had previously. Maybe I can just quickly share my screen so you get a sense of this. Yeah, so this is what I had, and when you're adding a group in SurveyCTO, so I'm just coming to the bottom here, and I'm going to click this add button here. Okay, so you can add visible fields, you can add groups. Okay, and when you add groups, okay, there are two types of groups. There's what we call a normal group, and then there are what we call repeated groups. So you can see this question here at the bottom says repeat the questions in this group. So if I said yes there, and going by your example, I'll say plots, and then I can click on configure. So at this point, I'm able to say what's going to happen to this particular group by determining using this repeat count. So this repeat count tells me how many times to repeat the questions that are going to be in this group. So you can either not have a repeat count, in which case SurveyCTO will be asking you, do you want to add another group? Do you want to add another group? Do you want to add another group? But there are also other options. You can set this to a specific fixed value. So you can say, I want this to repeat 2 times, or you can use a response to a previous field, okay, which is what I was giving the example of. If you have a question that asks how many plots you have, then you would refer to that particular field here. So the group of questions will repeat based on that. And so this is essentially how you would do it. So you would first ask how many plots you have, and then put all your questions in a repeat group, and you'll be able to repeat through those particular questions. That's a summarized version of the response.
But as you know, you can always submit tickets in the support center if you have any follow-ups, and we will also send out the recording and slides afterwards. All right. Anyone else want to ask any questions?
Yes, I have a question on constraints. So there is something said presented. I watched all the navigation of the constraint, and there is something where he put minus 99, and that's it means allowable exceptions. So I wanted to know what that particular field means.
Yeah, hi Cedric. That's a good question. All right, so let's go back to this example. And so you're saying when I entered the negative 99 as an outside exception, so what do I mean by that, right? So in this case, the example was asking for the respondent's legal age, right? But let's say in the purpose of when you're in your form, the respondent has an option to not answer, or if he doesn't know the age or chooses not to answer that question, there has to be a coded answer that will allow them to still move forward with the form. But when you go through the data, you can see what the negative 99 means. So let's say before making this constraint, you assign negative 99 to the option that this means that the respondent chose not to answer. So when we have this exception, the respondent can either choose to answer the age between 18 and 100 or select the negative 99. That will still allow them to move to the next field, but that basically means that they chose not to answer it. So that's the special code that will be the exception. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yes, I get it. Is it like a must or
no, you can
or
choose to have no exception. So so when I added the constraint, let's go back to the constraint option and replace with wizard, and we choose the numeric option. So this allowable exceptions, you can leave these options blank, and the constraint will be, so then that way the complaint constraint would simply be this, 18 and 100, and then you save it. So you see, it's now the constraint expression is dot greater than equal to 18 and less than equal to 100. So you can skip the exceptions part.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And one last question.
Yeah.
What if I have a questionnaire and I'm struggling to with some features? How do I get support from?
Oh, if you have a question, so if you're a trial or a paid user, you can create a support ticket and send us your form definition, and we can help you directly on the form.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Cedric. Thanks, Syed. And I see we have a question from Herbert. I will briefly read this out loud. Why does SurveyCTO not allow individuals to have free user accounts for? So, Herbert, maybe we can take this offline, but we do allow users to have, you can open up another free trial after your period ends as well. But perhaps if you need more support during your free trial, we always want to make sure that you have it. So you can kind of reach out to see if we can offer support
I would
afterwards.
like to add on to that, Shirley, that we do offer the community subscription, which is free. So that's basically after your trial, if you're not looking for a paid subscription, you can always sign up for the community subscription. And all you have to do is fill out an engagement form monthly. And it does come with limits, but you can have a free SurveyCTO server that way.
Okay, I see Gramiko.
I'm a new user of SurveyCTO. I've been an enumerator for around 5 years, and I decided to climb a notch higher. And I'm currently designing a form, general equilibrium effects, and I was having some challenges on designing. Like you ask a respondent on where he or where the respondent lives, current resident, and like now in Kenya, where I am, we have counties, then we have sub-counties. Now, I encountered a challenge, like you say, the respondent say is from Siaya County. Now, Siaya as a county has sub-counties. Now, the problem I was facing is for the question on sub-counties to be relevant for Siaya and not the rest of the counties. Now, I only wanted the sub-counties within Siaya to display and not the rest of the sub-counties in the country.
Okay. I can take that. There's two ways in which you can do that. So if your list of counties is not very long, you can do it inside your form using what are called choice filters. Okay. So take note of those keywords, and so you can you can be able to search our documentation. Just look for choice filters. So what choice filters do is they allow you to be able to say, this is my county, and then these sub counties belong to this county, these sub counties belong to this other county, and so on. And so when you use choice filters, you'll be able to filter out that way. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is using what are called preloaded files. So we use preloaded files when you have a lot of counties. So you can manage your counties and sub counties and their relationships from Excel. So you can create those relationships in Excel. And then you attach this Excel file to your form, and then you'll be able to search through that. We actually have some pretty good documentation that actually deals with that, with I think very relatable examples in both cases. So you basically can use those to actually manage that. So I'll link one or two of them in the chat so you can have a look at that. They can be your starting point. You can build from there. And if you are stuck at any point, you can always create a support ticket. But your first keyword, choice filters. With choice filter, it means your selections are within your form definition inside your form. And then preloading and using the search function, it means you are keeping these in an Excel file, and you are then using that Excel file to pull the counties and the relationships from there. So those are your two options to do that. So the first link I've put there is for preloading when you want to preload from external file, and then I will also put a link to choice filters. So those are the two ways in which you can do what you'd like to achieve.
Yes, thank you. That is very resourceful. Another question I had, or a concern or a challenge, is on the case where you are designing a form and you have questions that repeat. That is a repeat group, and now you don't have the exact number of times, like how many times the question should repeat, but it depends on your selection, like in a household roster. Or so it doesn't. There is no prior question asking how many individuals you have in the household for the number of questions to repeat in the group, but it depends on your selections from the roster. Now, designing that, I was finding it a bit challenging.
Okay. So for that one, I have another link. I have a lot of links for you. But I can show you again, depending on the complexity. I'll put a link in there. This is the documentation on follow-ups. Okay, and the idea here is that it actually has a very good sample form that shows you how you can do that. So you have a question beforehand that's asking, which of these do you want to look at? So you can take, for example, crops. You've got 10 crops. Which of these did you actually grow? You can pick 3 of those, and then you can have questions repeated based on the number that you've picked there. It could be a household. How many of these qualify? You pick the household members, and then you follow up on them. So it basically actually has a sample form that shows you how to actually do that. So you can use that. That's the last resource I've put there, the documentation on follow-ups. If you go there, there's also a sample form that shows you it has got 4 methods. So it's good to read through and then see which one applies the best to your current scenario. And then you can use one of those. So you can actually just pick the sample that's there and then tweak it, and it will work quite easily. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And just a request. I find your documentations very resourceful, and also I was requesting if this office hour is something that can be done. I know it can't be done daily or weekly or monthly, but if it is something that can go along with it. Like today, it was relevance and constraint, and my request was you just continue assisting us joining these sessions.
That's part of what we would like to do. At the end of today's office hours, I'd love if you all could fill out, send us your feedback. We have a form at the end because this is our very first one. Our goal is to make sure that, you're comfortable using our platform. And so if you can send us feedback on what we can do better, we would love to take it and be able to do more of these for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. I see a question in the chat from Helix. Helix, if you're able to, I know you wrote it down, but would you mind verbally articulating that to us so we know your question?
Yeah, in fact, my question is about to add like a text field with a choice. Don't remember. For example, I had to put like a question, which is which facility did you attend to? And this one, forget about the list of health facilities that are already programmed in the choice list. This one is just like free text, whereby one can just type any of the facility of her choice or his choice. But at the same time, it needs to come up with a choice to say, don't remember. So I don't know how we can combine those two to be in one question.
If I understand the question correctly, correct me if I'm wrong. So you have a text field and you would like the option for the user to be able to select don't remember. So if you want to keep it this way, the user can just type in don't remember. But the other option, which I think you're looking for, is instead have a select one field, which has an option to either don't remember or the user can enter the text using the specify other. And I'll key off from Mafia and drop a link in the chat that can show you how to do that. So we have a few ways in which you can structure a select one field to allow to enter text. So does that help?
Maybe I'll just also add that for those of you that are new, one of the things that sets apart SurveyCTO are what we refer to as field plugins. And field plugins basically allow us to extend the way our fields work and the way they look. And in particular, for your question, there is a field plugin that allows for a button to be at the bottom of a text field. Okay, so we'll probably drop a link also to that. So you're able to add, there'll be a text field on top. And then if somebody doesn't remember, there'll be a button at the bottom. So it will be a text field on top and then a button at the bottom that just says don't remember. So they can either type something into the text field or they can just click on the don't remember button and then they'll move forward. So that's another neat way of doing exactly what you want to do.
Thank you so much.
All right. So lastly, we want to wrap up today, this being our first office hours, and just let you know that if you have any questions about furthering your use of SurveyCTO, you can always reach out to us via the email here. And of course, this is the URL to our support center down here. And not really relevant for you all, but for our community users who don't have access to our support center, you can also post your questions on the community forum. We have an active group of users there who are also able to help. And in the meantime, we also do have a how-to video series on YouTube. When we send out the slides afterwards, you'll be able to click this link that directs you to it. And that lists popular videos of common questions that our users asked. I've looked through those videos myself, and it was very helpful, especially in relation to some constraints features. And, lastly, if you are using social media, I would say follow our LinkedIn. We post a lot of resources and conferences we're attending on there, so don't miss out. And lastly, if I could ask you all to do one thing, is to take 2 minutes and scan the QR code that you see on the slide here. We would love your feedback on how you think today's office hours went. It's our first foray into this new format of webinars, but we think it could be helpful for you all. And so, what went well, what could be improved, all of that would be very helpful. So please take some time, 2 minutes, if you will, to share your feedback. And with that officially concludes our webinar for today. We'll send out the recording and slides in a few days. And I think with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone.